Long before anyone called it Pompeii, the city was already listening. In the 7th and 6th centuries before Christ, Greek sailors from the colony of Cumae drifted along the coast of southern Italy, and their influence settled over the small settlement on the Bay of Naples like a fine mist that never quite lifted. Temples rose in the Greek style, among them a sanctuary believed to honor Apollo, god of light and prophecy. It was an enormous moment for a young town, proof that the wider Mediterranean world had noticed it existed. Then came the Etruscans, sweeping down from the north, seizing control of pockets of Campania, this very stretch of coastline included. Word of their power traveled fast, as it always does among smaller towns wary of their neighbors. The Etruscans did not stay forever, but they left fingerprints that never washed away. Early water systems, stone building techniques, a skeleton of roads that later generations simply paved over and called their own. Pompeii in these early centuries behaved like a child growing up at a crossroads, absorbing something from every stranger who passed through, and slowly becoming someone. The real transformation came from the mountains. In the 5th century before Christ, the Samnites, a hardened, warlike people from the interior highlands of central Italy, poured down into the plains of Campania. Slowly they took the region, Pompeii included, and what followed can only be described as the town's true coming of age. The Samnites did not simply occupy Pompeii, they rebuilt it into something whose bones are still visible today. Sturdy defensive walls rose around the settlement, giving the city real security. Streets were laid out with geometric discipline. Public buildings, chief among them, the Forum, the city's beating civic heart, took shape. Even the Oscan language the Samnites spoke outlived them by centuries, and inscriptions in that tongue can still be found carved into the walls of certain houses today. It was in this same Samnite period that one of Pompeii's most extraordinary structures first took root, the amphitheater. Though later rebuilt and expanded, its earliest foundations belong to this era. That amphitheater would eventually be recognized as the oldest known stone amphitheater anywhere in the Roman world, and its existence tells us something tender about the Pompeians. Even before they were Roman, they loved spectacle, performance, the thrill of gathering as a crowd. That appetite for communal life would remain one of the defining threads of Pompeian culture for centuries to come. But peace, even Samnite peace, is never eternal, and one day it simply ended. In the 4th and 3rd centuries before Christ, the Roman Republic, steadily tightening its grip across the Italian peninsula, went to war with the Samnites again and again in conflicts that reshaped the region. These became known as the Samnite Wars, dragging on across generations, an unbearably long stretch of time for those living through it. Rome won in the end. Pompeii, like so many other Campanian towns, entered the Roman system as a soci, an ally, permitted to keep a measure of internal self-rule, but obligated to send soldiers into Roman armies and follow Rome's lead in foreign affairs. There was no other path left open to it. This arrangement held for nearly 2 centuries, but underneath the surface, a quiet resentment was taking root throughout Italy, Pompeii included. The growing unfairness between Romans and their so-called allies. Italian allies bled for Rome's wars, yet were denied full Roman citizenship, an injustice that sat heavily on people who had given everything and received so little. That resentment finally erupted in 91 BC into the Great Uprising known as the Social War. Pompey joined the rebellion alongside many other towns of Campania and Samnium, hoping for a different outcome. But despite the courage of its people, the revolt was crushed. The Roman general Sulla marched on Pompeii in 89 BC, and after a punishing siege took the city. That military defeat, strangely enough, cracked open a new door for Pompeii. In 80 BC, Sulla transformed the city into a Roman colonia, renaming it Colonia Cornelia Veneria Pompeianorum. It honored both Sulla's own family, the Cornelii, and the goddess Venus, who from that point forward became the city's official protector. Retired Roman soldiers settled within its walls, and gradually Latin language and Roman custom began replacing the old Oscan Samnite traditions. But this was no overnight substitution. It unfolded slowly, blending into a rich fusion of two cultures that made Pompeii something genuinely unique within the wider Roman world. From this point on, Pompeii entered a golden era that would last right up until the moment of its destruction. Through the 1st century BC and into the 1st century AD, the city blossomed into one of the liveliest commercial and social centers of Campania. Its position along the main roads and its closeness to major ports meant that goods from across the Mediterranean, wine, olive oil, and above all the famous fermented fish sauce known as garum, flowed outward from Pompeii to the wider empire. The garum workshops, whose remains still survive in the city today, prove that Pompeii was never merely a place that consumed. It was a genuine engine of production and export. The wealth that trade brought is written plainly into the city's architecture. Grand, luxurious houses, the House of the Faun among them, with its breathtaking mosaic depicting the Battle of Alexander the Great, or the mysterious Villa of the Mysteries, its walls covered in enigmatic paintings tied to the rites of the god Dionysus, stand as testimony to the artistic taste and economic muscle of Pompeii's elite. Opulent public baths with underground heating systems, the great forum that served as the city's political and commercial heart, and temples to gods like Jupiter, Isis, and Apollo, all reveal that Pompeii, despite its modest size, a population between 10 and 20,000, was a complete city. Theaters for drama, an amphitheater for gladiatorial combat, even a palaestra where the young train their bodies. Yet perhaps the most beautiful, and certainly the most human, corner of Pompeii is not found in the mansions of its aristocracy, but in its ordinary streets. Its walls were crowded with the debris of everyday life: election posters for local candidates, announcements of gladiatorial shows, love poems scrawled by some young man for the girl he adored, and even the simple jokes and crude insults of the marketplace crowd. These scraps of writing, preserved for thousands of years thanks to volcanic ash, transform Pompeii from a dry archaeological site into a living, breathing world, one where ordinary people, much as we do today, fell in love, cracked jokes, struck deals, and dreamed, which is simply what it means to be human. Amid all this flourishing, a warning arrived, one that almost no one took seriously enough. On the 5th of February in AD 62, a powerful earthquake shook Campania, inflicting heavy damage on Pompeii and neighboring towns, Herculaneum among them. Many temples, homes, and public buildings collapsed or were badly damaged, some destroyed outright. The Roman historian Tacitus recorded the event in his writings. The people of Pompeii, with the same stubborn hope found in so many ancient civilizations, set about rebuilding. For 17 years, the city worked to heal its wounds, Scaffolding stood over damaged buildings. Laborers repaired public baths and temples, and life, despite the ruin around it, carried on. No one knew that this earthquake was merely a warning bell for a far greater catastrophe brewing inside Mount Vesuvius, something no one could have imagined even in their darkest thoughts. And then, on an autumn day in AD 79, though recent research suggests the eruption more likely happened in October, not August as long believed, it happened, the event that would immortalize Pompeii forever. We know a great deal about that day thanks to the letters of Pliny the Younger, a Roman writer and lawyer, letters he sent years later to the historian Tacitus, describing the death of his uncle, Pliny the Elder, the Roman naval commander and naturalist. That day, around midday or early afternoon, an immense column of smoke and ash, which Pliny the Younger famously compared to the shape of a pine tree, rose from the summit of Vesuvius into the sky, and it transfixed everyone who saw it. At first, some watched with curiosity, even wonder rather than fear. But soon ash and light volcanic stones, pumice, began raining down on Pompeii. The sky grew darker and darker until, according to witnesses, absolute darkness fell over the city even in broad daylight. People who had perhaps first assumed this was simply a passing storm gradually understood they were facing something far beyond another earthquake, and they steeled themselves to accept the danger closing in. Hours passed, and the layer of ash and pumice piling onto rooftops grew so heavy that many roofs collapsed under the weight. Some who had sheltered inside their homes, believing them safe, died beneath the rubble. Others, with the kind of courage found only in moments of utter desperation, chose to flee the city, tying pillows or cloth over their heads to shield themselves from falling stone. But for many, escape came too late. Just before dawn the following day, what archaeologists now call pyroclastic flows, deadly clouds of superheated gas, ash and rock racing at speeds beyond 100 kilometers an hour, with temperatures reaching several hundred degrees Celsius, surged down toward Pompeii. These surges destroyed everything in their path within seconds. Those still alive at that moment died instantly, a death so sudden that the very postures of their bodies, in their final breath, were preserved for centuries. Pliny the Elder, then commanding the Roman fleet at Misenum, chose not to flee, but to sail toward the disaster, driven by scientific curiosity and by a wish to rescue people trapped along the shore. He ultimately died at Stabiae, near Pompeii, after inhaling toxic fumes. His nephew Pliny the Younger recorded that death for future generations with scientific precision and profound grief in equal measure. That account remains to this day one of the earliest and most exact scientific descriptions of a volcanic eruption in human history. And eruptions of this kind are still called, because of it, Plinian eruptions. What happened afterward may be the saddest, and at the same time the most astonishing, chapter of Pompeii's story. The city vanished entirely beneath a layer of ash and stone between 4 and 6 meters deep. Its name gradually faded even from Roman maps, as though it had simply never existed. Yet that very burial, which felt like an unthinkable tragedy to the people living through it, became, thousands of years later, an unparalleled gift to humanity. Volcanic ash, starved of the oxygen decay requires, sealed the city like a time capsule. Painted walls, loaves of bread, still sitting in bakery ovens, wine jars still full, and the postures of victims who, in their final moments, had tried to shield their faces or embrace loved ones, all remained untouched for nearly 17 centuries. For a very long stretch of time, Pompeii slipped into a sleep of forgetting. Generations came and went. The Roman Empire collapsed, the Middle Ages began, the Renaissance flowered, and countless other events unfolded. Yet Pompeii lay silent and hidden directly beneath the feet of people farming the ground above it. Only a vague name and a handful of ancient sources, and the occasional accidental discovery of a fragment of wall or a coin during agricultural digging, hinted that a secret lay buried beneath that soil. Finally, in 1748, following a similar discovery at Herculaneum in 1738, systematic excavation began at the site of Pompeii under the patronage of Charles VII, King of Naples, who later became Charles III of Spain. But honesty demands it be said, these earliest excavations resembled treasure hunting far more than scientific archaeology. Laborers hunted for statues, coins, and valuable objects to enrich royal collections, and many precious finds left the site without any careful record of where or in what context they had been found. And yet, even these crude early digs gradually drew the attention of all Europe, and crowds of the curious soon longed to see the place. Aristocrats and artists making the 18th century's grand tour, the classic educational journey through Italy, now had a dazzling new destination, a city where time itself seemed to have simply stopped. This discovery left a deep mark on European culture and art. The neoclassical style, drawing its inspiration from the clean lines and balanced beauty of ancient Greek and Roman architecture, owed an enormous debt to the unearthing of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Decorative motifs, wall colors, above all that famous shade later christened Pompeian red, and mosaic patterns found their way into the homes, palaces, even the clothing of 18th and 19th century Europe. Pompeii, once suffocated beneath its own ash, was now quietly shaping the aesthetic taste of an entire continent. But the real turning point in how the world approached Pompeii arrived in the second half of the 19th century, when the Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli took charge of the excavations in 1860. Unlike his predecessors, Fiorelli hunted not for treasure, but for truth. He introduced a systematic method of excavation, removing the layers of ash slowly from the top down and recording everything exactly as it lay in place. But Fiorelli's greater innovation was the technique that now bears his name. He realized that the bodies of victims buried in the ash had decomposed and vanished over time, but that a cavity shaped precisely like each body remained inside the hardened layer of ash. By injecting liquid plaster into these cavities, he was able to produce exact casts of the victim's final moments. A man shielding his face with his hands, a mother clutching her child to her chest, a dog still tethered to his chain. These plaster casts, still displayed at Pompeii today, are perhaps the most devastating and most deeply human evidence to survive from any ancient catastrophe anywhere on Earth. A frozen instant of fear, love, and despair that speaks in its silence, louder than any history book ever could. The 20th century opened a new chapter in Pompeii's story, one carrying both fresh suffering and genuine scientific advance. In 1943, during the Second World War, Allied forces bombing German positions in the area accidentally struck sections of the ancient site, damaging some recently uncovered buildings. It stood as a bitter reminder that even after thousands of years, this ancient city remained exposed to new human dangers. Once the war ended, conservation and restoration resumed with renewed seriousness. Archaeologists, using new technologies, aerial photography at first, later 3D scanning and DNA analysis, uncovered fresh layers of Pompeii's story. Precise details about residents' diets, illnesses, even family relationships, traced through genetic analysis of skeletal remains. Today, Pompeii is no abandoned ruin, but one of the most dynamic archaeological sites on Earth. In 1997, UNESCO added the archaeological site of Pompeii, together with Herculaneum and the surrounding villas, to its World Heritage List, formal recognition of the site's unmatched importance for understanding human civilization. Yet preserving a site this vast and fragile has been a constant struggle. In the 2010s, the collapse of several historic structures, including part of the so-called House of the Gladiators, raised serious alarm about the state of the site's upkeep and drew sharp international criticism. That crisis pushed Italy and the European Union to launch a major initiative called the Grande Progetto Pompeii, aimed at stabilizing the buildings, improving drainage against rain damage, and protecting this human treasure for the long term. The result of these efforts has been a fresh chapter of astonishing discovery. In recent years, new excavations in previously unexplored sections of the city have revealed houses with extraordinary wall paintings, among them an image resembling a modern-day pizza, a room decorated with scenes from the myth of Leda and the Swan, and even newly found skeletons that tell fresh, harrowing stories of the residents' final moments. Every new season of digging feels like a fresh chapter in a novel not yet finished, a novel whose characters lived nearly 2,000 years ago, yet whose story is still being told for the very first time. Alongside the ancient site, a modern town also named Pompeii has grown up nearby. Home to roughly 25,000 people, its daily life flowing on in the shadow of its ancient history. This modern town, built largely around a pilgrimage site known as the Sanctuary of Our Lady of the Rosary, welcomes thousands of religious pilgrims every year, as though the fate of this land remained forever bound to faith, hope, and rebuilding. Today, millions of tourists travel to Pompeii each year to walk its cobblestone streets, to pass the same bakeries and public baths, and to stand in silence before the plaster casts of the eruption's victims. Some of them may not realize that the mountain looming behind the ancient site, Vesuvius itself, is still an active volcano, one that modern science watches closely, because millions of people in and around Naples today live in the shadow of the very same danger that destroyed Pompeii nearly 2,000 years ago. Perhaps the final message of Pompeii's story is exactly this: a beautiful, bitter contradiction between death and immortality. A city that was utterly destroyed in a single day, within a matter of hours, yet for that very reason lives on forever in human memory. Had the eruption never happened, Pompeii would likely have faded slowly, like hundreds of other Roman towns, worn down, ruined, buried gradually beneath centuries of new construction, its name surviving, if at all, only in the footnotes of history books. But the catastrophe that struck on that autumn afternoon in AD 79 rescued the city, strangely enough, from the erosion of time. The very ash that stole life from its people was the thing that preserved their story forever. Pompeii teaches us that civilizations, even at the height of their flourishing, remain forever fragile before nature, But it also shows how a catastrophe can become, thousands of years later, a bridge toward a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. Every time archaeology brushes aside a fresh layer of ash and uncovers a vivid painting, a burnt loaf of bread, or even a love poem scratched into a wall, Pompeii comes alive once more, not in the way its people once hoped, but in a way even they could never have imagined, as a silent teacher for generations not yet born. And perhaps in the end, this is Pompeii's greatest miracle of all, a city that died, yet never truly disappeared.